Scroll was the first to express gratitude to Roland for his care and support towards all the witches. She mentioned that no words could adequately describe their gratitude, and they hoped to continue serving Roland in the future. Roland breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the witches were about to bid farewell collectively. Wendy couldn't help but laugh out loud. She explained that this place was the sacred mountain that witches had longed for, and as long as Roland didn't chase them away, they wished to reside there indefinitely. Roland was delighted that the witches felt this way. Wendy clapped her hands and asked the other witches to proceed to the dining hall together. Before leaving, Scroll glanced at Roland's exhausted face, expressing concern for his well-being. Roland reassured her, patting his chest and saying that his health was perfectly fine. After the witches left one by one, only Roland and Anna remained in the office. At that moment, Anna took a few steps forward and gently hugged him. Carl, who was about to come in to report on his work, stood at the door and saw the two of them through the crack, then silently turned and left. As the moon rose overhead, the scorching air gradually cooled down. Tassa sat in the courtyard, holding an oil lamp and walking out of the room. It was none other than Hill, who had been hiding within the skeleton's finger. The people with him were all his companions, former members of the circus troupe. Each person introduced themselves, and the last one was called Magician, who had infiltrated the largest rat gang. Since their failed attack on the dock, their leader had been killed by the church's judgment army. Tassa didn't care about the trivial details, as long as he knew that the biggest rat gang was now non-existent. Undoubtedly, it was good news. He could perhaps seize this opportunity to recruit a group of rats with nowhere else to go and expand his sources of information. Tassa tapped the table and spoke solemnly. As Roland's personal guard, he was responsible for collecting information from all corners of the kingdom. However, for the sake of formality, he still asked once again, "Are you willing to serve under His Highness?" Without any hesitation, the 5 individuals shouted, "We are willing." Tassa instructed them on how to meet and what the secret code would be. He also informed them that Timothy would not sit on the throne forever. Afterward, he let them leave. Hill mentioned that Timothy had returned from the eastern region. He had heard rumors that Timothy was recruiting a batch of rats to join his army. Many leaders had already gone to the palace. Tacit quickly realized that Timothy wanted these rats as cannon fodder, just like during the previous attack on the Changji stronghold and the border town. The only question was, what was their target this time? Outside the western city walls, refugees were undergoing an unprecedented identity check under the guidance of the soldiers from the First Army. At this moment, a middle-aged man cautiously approached. He claimed to be a carpenter and had heard that craftsmen could obtain a place to live. The staff confirmed this, but said that before that, they needed to ask a few questions, such as his name and whether he could read and write. He introduced himself as Marcel and admitted that he couldn't read nor write. The staff then took out a sheet of paper with carpentry vocabulary written on it. This initial screening method was devised by His Highness the Prince. He gathered craftsmen from various industries and asked them questions about their professional knowledge and corresponding handling methods, recording their answers to form an inquiry form. In this way, by comparing the questionnaire during the review and asking a few questions, they could immediately determine if the person was lying. After a few questions, Marcel was able to answer most of them, and his tone of speech became increasingly fluent. Just as the staff was about to give him his identification certificate, Berev appeared. He looked at Marcel and asked him to extend his hand. If he was indeed a carpenter, his palm should not be so rough, especially the 2 calluses beneath the palm, which would become smooth and tough from frequent contact with wood. Additionally, carpenters often use black ink to draw outlines, so their palms would be stained with a large amount of indelible black ink, making them dark, not yellow. Berev observed Marcel's surprised expression in response to his questions, and he gave Marcel a chance to tell the truth. Unable to hold back, Marcel knelt down on the ground and admitted that he was not a carpenter but rather a neighbor of the carpenter. The staff members were amazed at how Berev knew all this. Berev nonchalantly replied, feigning indifference. Seeing the staff members' shocked and admiring expressions, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. In the past, the person who had just been questioned would have undoubtedly been punished. Furthermore, under the influence of His Highness, Barev's way of handling issues had recently changed. Roland sat back in his office chair and carefully reviewed the statistical report prepared by Barev. It took 3 full days for the city hall to comb through over 6,000 refugees, and among them, the proportion of craftsmen was relatively low. In the end, only 150 individuals passed the verification process. Roland instructed Barev to arrange housing for the craftsmen and their families. After a moment of silence, Roland suddenly asked, "How many people have fled after the award ceremony?" Barev paused for a moment and replied, "So far, there haven't been any from the native residents, but there are 7 serfs. The eastern refugees are more numerous, totaling over 100. Roland let out a sigh. This was the moment when he realized that pushing the witches to the forefront would lead to such a situation. The native population of the border town had fully accepted the witches, and it seemed that most of the serfs also supported them. However, among the eastern refugees, despite receiving treatment from the witches and being in a desperate situation due to the destruction of their homeland, over 100 individuals still chose to leave. This somewhat surprised Roland. At this point, Barev suggested executing all of them. He knew that those who were determined to leave in such circumstances must have been deeply influenced by the church. They would undoubtedly become followers of the church, so there was no need to show them any mercy. Roland closed his eyes and thought to himself. Truly devout individuals who were loyal to the church would be the over 300 refugees who were unwilling to leave the capital even in the face of the plague. Perhaps these people who decided to leave the border town simply couldn't change their beliefs. If Roland were to encounter this group on the battlefield, he would not hesitate to defeat them. However, he couldn't bring himself to mercilessly wield his sword and kill a group of civilians just because their thinking was futile and their ideals clashed with his own. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to let Nightingale interrogate these refugees. If there were any spies or infiltrators among them, they would be captured, but the others would be allowed to leave. Roland stood up and asked Barev to join him in taking a few photos to relax their minds. In the courtyard in front of the castle, he called Carter, Axe, and Soraya to join them. In one corner of the garden, several boards measuring 4 to 5 meters in length and width were laid out, with a canvas covering the ground. Although the border town was not large at present, its future scale would be several times its current size. Roland planned to promote this means of transportation in the town, a simple and affordable device that could replace a horse. Roland lifted the canvas, and Carter was immediately fascinated by the novel contraption before him. With 2 wheels and an iron frame, everyone had different questions about it. Roland smiled and explained that it was a bicycle. He positioned his feet on the pedals, assumed a standard starting posture, and with a push of 1 foot, he rode the bicycle around the stone path in the courtyard. After completing a lap, Roland pressed the brakes and effortlessly leaped off the bike, gazing at his astonished subordinates. A sense of immense satisfaction filled his heart. Roland had called them over with a purpose in mind. He wanted them to learn how to ride bicycles first, and then have Soraya capture their cycling photo on wooden boards. He wanted all the citizens to see that for the price of 1 or 2 gold royals, they could possess a mount similar to the Lord, the commander of the First Army, the chief knight, and the chief administrator of the city hall. The 3 of them spent the entire afternoon frolicking in the courtyard. Carter lived up to his title as the chief knight and was the first to master the art of cycling. Axe followed closely behind and successfully completed a lap around the courtyard. However, Barev failed to succeed even after attempting more than 10 times. He either wobbled dangerously close to falling off or couldn't move in a straight line. In the end, Roland had Soraya draw a static image of him standing next to the bicycle, gripping the handlebars. Once the bicycle promotional artwork was taken care of, the prince returned to his office. With some time before dinner, he had his guards summon Kyle Sichi. With the breakthrough in the development of mercury fulminate, the research and development of the new generation of weapons could now be prioritized. Undoubtedly, in the era of firearms, caliber represented justice, and rate of fire represented freedom. The more powerful the weapon, the greater the glory. However, an awkward problem arose. If they continued to develop along this path, they would soon run out of the lab's supply of the two acids required. Roland assigned Kyle a new task to design a chemical production system that could efficiently produce the two acids. As Roland was not knowledgeable in these matters, he hoped Kyle would figure it out on his own. As Roland pulled open the drawer, intending to snack on some fish jerky to ease his boredom, he was surprised to find the snack drawer empty. He paused for a moment, then looked up to see a piece of fish jerky being offered to him, right at the edge of his mouth. "You were looking for this," the golden-haired woman across from him smiled. Roland took a bite of the fish jerky, unable to hide the smile that curled on his lips. "I thought you would remain lost in the mist forever." "That wouldn't be so bad. At least others can't see me, but I can still see you," Nightingale replied, pursing her lips. Seeing the familiar expression on the other person's face, Roland couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. "You mentioned before that you didn't know what kind of expression to show." Roland chuckled. "This is good too." On a raised platform, Roland congratulated the students below who had completed their elementary education, becoming the first batch of graduates in the border town. The young girl among the audience brightened her eyes. It was her first time seeing Prince Roland. Roland hoped they wouldn't become arrogant and complacent. There were still many knowledge waiting for them to explore, to discover. Nonetheless, he wanted to express his congratulations. "Long live His Highness!" Someone shouted out, and soon everyone excitedly joined in, "Long live His Highness!" The young girl in the audience turned to her friend and said that she wanted to work at the bicycle factory in the future. The pay was good, and she could even get a new bike. When the cheers subsided, Roland smiled and informed the students below that he would begin awarding the graduation certificates. The first name called was Pip. Pip felt his whole body tremble as he looked at the prince. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Stiffly, he walked out of the line, feeling the frantic thumping of his heart. Ever since he attended the award ceremony, he had a place he wanted to go. He couldn't become a military leader like Axe, nor possess the incredible abilities of a witch, but he had another path to take. Roland patted Pip's shoulder, congratulating him on his successful graduation. Pip looked at his graduation certificate. He was going to apply to the chemistry laboratory, aspiring to become a sage like Mr. Kylesichi. Despite being in the summer season, the ice and snow on the Hermes had hardly melted. Neen stood atop the Tau, gazing into the distance while holding a report. It was surprising to learn that the witches could cure the current plague, and there seemed to be a powerful long-range weapon in Border Town. Tevrin slammed his fist on the table. He couldn't believe that Idiot had dispatched the Faceless to attack. If Heather were to return, she would surely be furious. Witches who could grow into pure ones were rare and extremely difficult to cultivate. Neen spoke slowly. "Whether it's the Punishment Army or the witches, their ultimate goal is to eliminate the enemy. Some losses are unavoidable in the process." After reading the entire letter, Taefun couldn't believe that Timothy had launched a surprise attack on Changji's stronghold and completely wiped out the envoy group. The contents of the second letter came from two sources: a report from Petrov from the stronghold and intelligence from local spy. Combining the information, it appeared that a militia group from beyond the western border had indeed launched a surprise attack on the stronghold and plundered the church. They not only consumed the church's pills themselves, but also targeted the medicine stored in the church. As for the latter point, Neen found it somewhat peculiar. According to the report from Petrov, after setting fire to the church, the attackers immediately withdrew from the stronghold and disappeared without a trace. So how did they manage to ambush and kill members of the envoy group? The diplomatic envoy should have already arrived in Border Town, and the two should never have crossed paths. Taefun quickly realized this as well. Could it be? Could Roland Wimbledon have orchestrated the elimination of the envoy group and pinned it all on his brother, Timothy Wimbledon? Regardless, these witches heading towards the western border deserved their attention and thorough investigation. Min didn't respond but pointed to the third letter instead. You should read the final letter before we discuss further, he said. Taefun glanced at him with confusion and unfolded the letter. Soon, his hands began to tremble, and he could barely hold onto the thin sheet of paper. The letter revealed that a large number of witches had appeared in the fjord and destroyed all the churches. Min knew that those witches were far across the sea, and it seemed that Prince Roland Wimbledon of Greycastle posed the greatest obstacle to their plans. Min planned to lead 100 punishment army soldiers and pure ones who remained in the church to thoroughly cleanse the western border of Greycastle and seize an opportunity to deal with the fjord witches. Taefun wasn't entirely supportive of the idea. Suddenly, a flustered clergyman rushed into the room, carrying an urgent message. A massive fleet had landed on the coast of the Kingdom of Eternal Winter, and hordes of enemies were besieging the capital city. The situation was dire. Heather was desperately resisting, but the enemy numbers were overwhelming, and they had consumed the pills as well. The enemy's banners revealed an astonishing truth: the enemy fleet belonged to the Black Sail Fleet of Queen of the Green Water. The granite steps of the palace of the Eternal Winter capital have been stained with blood, and the smell in the air is a bit pungent. There are many corpses lying on the ground. There are God's punishment army, believers, and their own people. There are also sand people. After a while, 2 armored guards walked into the temple with a woman with her hands tied behind her back. Garcia knew she would not surrender, and she wanted to send Heather to the heavens. Heather can slowly beg the gods for salvation, or she can beg for forgiveness. She will cut off Heather's fingers and torture her so that she can fully experience the pain and helplessness of the citizens of Port Greenwater. Heather looked at Garcia coldly and sneered, then asked if Garcia is waiting to be crushed by the church army, or drifting on the sea for the rest of her life? Garika signaled her guards to do it. She already had a perfect plan. The army of the church is now attacking Wolfheart Kingdom. Hermes is like an undefended city. The guards drew out their daggers and approached Bishop Heather. Heather gritted her teeth and didn't let out a cry of pain. At this time, the bishop's left hand has become a bare palm, and there are beads of sweat on Heather's forehead. Garcia's Sand Tribe companions couldn't bear it any longer. Garcia laughed and told her, "Do you want to know how those witches in the church's hands will be treated? I guess you're not interested." At that moment, Heather suddenly burst into laughter. She said Garcia would never understand the greatness of the church. For those who opposed the church, destruction was the only outcome. Garcia chuckled, seeing Heather not uttering a word of plea even until her death. Back in the border town, which was about to face its last and hottest month of summer, Anna enjoyed her ice cream. Nightingale pushed open the door, followed by Maisie and Lightning. Roland noticed the weeds and leaves on their heads, realizing they had disturbed a bird's nest. Roland took out a pre-written letter from the drawer and handed it to Maisie, asking her to give it to Tilly when she returned to the fjord. Maisie hesitated for a moment, blinked a few times, and carefully tucked the envelope into her bag. Seeing her expression of sudden realization, Roland suppressed a smile. It seemed that the charm of the small town was quite powerful. Lightning also had a task. He opened the map and pointed to a southern region. He wanted Lightning to take Maisie for a flight and place 2 flags at the junction of the shallows and the mountains, marking it on the map. If Tilly agreed to send the witches, they would guide the sailboat to this location and be greeted by a hot air balloon. As everyone heard the news of possible new witches coming to the border town, they became excited. On the second day after Maisie's departure, Roland took the witches on board the new generation of hot air balloons. Before this, Roland handed them a stack of white papers and instructed them to spread them out to create a massive canvas, while Soroya painted. The pure fabric of the coating was much lighter and more resilient, with no seams at the joints, making it resistant to disintegration even at large sizes. Perhaps soon he would be able to start producing Berlin airships, dropping bombs from kilometers high, achieving 3-dimensional warfare across land, sea, and air. Just the thought of it was exhilarating. Anna looked at Roland and not sure what His Highness is smelling at. Lily sneered and said, "I guess he is thinking about those new witches. After all, His Highness is still a man." The entire voyage went smoothly, with the witches chattering incessantly in the air. After flying around the shallows for a while, the group returned to the castle aboard the hot air balloon. Roland noticed Wendy, who was in charge of direction control, occasionally pounding her own shoulders, appearing very tired. He had heard that women with large boing-boings often experience shoulder soreness, and specialized undergarments were designed to solve this annoyance. Although he hadn't verified this claim, it wouldn't hurt to give it a try. Roland decided to make a small gift for each adult witch. The merchant caravan from the capital city arrived at the border town. Margaret and the merchants sat in the hot air balloon. Margaret was excited, while Marlin was somewhat afraid. Although they, as ordinary people, were flying in the sky, Marlin believed it was all thanks to the witches. Without the witches, the hot air balloon wouldn't be able to take off. Margaret noticed that Anna was only releasing flames, and as long as there was hot air, the balloon would rise on its own. Margaret wanted to purchase 5 hot air balloons that could carry 1 person each. She intended to use them on the ship so they could spot nearby pirate ships earlier. Roland gritted his teeth and said the cost wouldn't be low. He estimated it would require over 1,000 gold royals. Margaret generously said, 1,000 gold royal for each balloon. Marlin was also very interested and was willing to help Roland promote them. The price offered by the other party pleasantly surprised Roland. The 1,000 gold royal were a 5-fold markup he had estimated for the price, but he didn't expect the other party to readily accept a price so quickly. He thought of another way to make money. Additionally, whether it was hydrogen or coal gas, they were both consumables that needed to be refilled in the border town after use. This would provide additional income. Roland pretended to hesitate for a while and finally nodded, saying, "Then it's a deal." In the slumbering isle, Ashes frowned as she looked at the letter brought by Maisie. She couldn't help but be surprised. She didn't expect Roland to choose Sylvie. Doesn't he care about having his identity exposed? Tilly was also unsure. Perhaps her ability annotation was written too vaguely, or maybe Roland doesn't mind revealing his identity in front of them to show his sincerity and cooperation. There's also another possibility, Ashes said. Roland might truly be Tilly's brother, so he doesn't care about Sylvie's abilities. Tilly smiled. She knew her brother better than anyone else. Throughout their lives, he excelled at evading and run away from all trouble, and it was impossible for him to wage war against the church to protect the witches. Ashes also saw the other witches that Roland needed, one of whom was Lien. She was one of the most important witches on Slumbering Isle. If she were gone, no one could repair the houses once they were damaged, and no one could alter the topography of the island. The same went for Honey, who could command animals to help everyone catch fish. It was thanks to her that they enjoyed various delicious seafood every day. As for the other 2 witches, Ashes didn't have much objection. Tilly's expression became serious, and she opposed Ash's words. What is useful and what is useless? When she sent them to the border town, it was with the hope of forging an alliance, not abandoning them. Regardless of their abilities, all the sisters who chose to come to this isolated island are witches. How can they select them based on the usefulness of their abilities if they want to build Slumbering Isle as a home for witches? Ashes understood that this was Tilly's genuine expression of anger. She knelt down on one knee and apologized. Tilly sighed and slowly spoke. Roland selected these 5 witches from over 100. Among them are the ones you mentioned, Candle and Evelyn, whom you think have little impact. Are they truly useless? Perhaps through this contact, we will be able to understand whether his selection of these 2 was a coincidence or if he saw aspects that we haven't realized. I don't want you to speak such words. All the witches are partners in our shared goal, not mere tools. The departure was scheduled for the next day, and the ship responsible for taking them to Grey Castle was a warship from the border town. Sylvie leaned against the railing of the ship and took out a piece of beef jerky from her bag. She raised it above her head and waved it. A massive seagull descended from the sky with a cry and snatched the jerky in one bite. Captain Jack 1 I knew that seagulls would never get lost at sea, and they could sense the approach of storms in advance. Jack looked at the plumped seagull in the sky. Although it looked similar to an ordinary seagull, it was much fatter. This journey was entrusted to Sylvie by Princess Tilly to establish connections and provide mutual assistance with another gathering place for witches. In addition to the chosen 5 renowned witches on board, there were Ashes and Molly. However, they won't stay. Their presence was only to ensure a smooth and safe voyage. Sylvie, on the other hand, had another responsibility: to uncover Roland Wimbledon's true identity. But honestly, Sylvie felt that this task wouldn't be so easy to accomplish. If the Witch Union didn't agree, it would still be manageable. But what if they didn't want the information to leak out and decided to imprison her and the other 4? Looking through the cabin wall, Sylvie sighed as she watched Leon, Evelyn, and others happily playing with the slime. She couldn't help but hope that the witches of the Witch Union were as welcoming and friendly as Maisie had described. Ashes looked at the other witches and sighed, patting her forehead. "Y'all must remember to keep your distance from Lord Roland Wimbledon. Never be alone with him easily." "Why? Isn't he Lady Tilly's brother?" Evelyn asked, puzzled. "He is indeed," Ashes replied seriously, "but that doesn't stop him from enjoying groping witches' bottoms." Everyone gasped in shock upon hearing Ash's words. As they approached the shore, Sylvie noticed a peculiar dark shape approaching them. It was massive in size, and all the witches looked up in astonishment, hardly believing what they saw. A remarkably large spherical object floated in the air, with a wicker basket hanging beneath it. Maisie and another witch stood on either side, accompanying the basket's flight. What caught everyone's attention was the long yellow banner hanging from the bottom of the basket, displaying a bold message: "Welcome to the border town." After the basket descended, Wendy stepped forward to welcome the witches from the fjord. Then she turned her gaze towards Ash, revealing a joyful smile. The appearance of another witch caught Sylvie's attention, as her strikingly pure blue eyes resembled a pristine lake. However, what intrigued Sylvie even more was this witch's immense and flawless magical power. Lightning also arrived, followed closely by Maisie, landing on Lightning's shoulder. Once Ashes briefly introduced the witches from Slumbering Isle, Wendy smiled and invited everyone to board the basket. Ashes smiled back, bid farewell to Wendy, and departed. Wendy looked slightly disappointed seeing Ash leaving, pursing her lips, but assured Ashes that she would take good care of them. Sylvie felt a slight tremor beneath her feet as the basket lifted off the ground. She saw Ashes and Molly waving to them as the hot air balloon ascended higher and higher, shrinking the landscape below into tiny dots. She sighed. No matter what, a new life in the border town was about to begin. The atmosphere during the flight was much more harmonious than Sylvie had initially expected, just as Ashes had said. Wendy showed care and concern for everyone, treating them all equally without any distinction because they were newcomers. Lightning seemed to get along well with Maisie, and she had a lively personality. Occasionally, she would fly into the basket with the chubby pigeon and engage in conversations with everyone, completely disregarding the fact that she was once a stranger. With Maisie acting as a bridge between the two groups, the other 4 gradually relaxed and began inquiring about the situation in the border town from Lightning. Eventually, the young girl hovered near the basket and started sharing stories about the town's battles against demonic beasts and invaders, as well as the incredible feats of the prince, such as his inventions and ideas. Her tales left everyone in awe and captivated their attention. Before long, a hot air balloon arrived above the castle. It descended directly into the castle backyard, and as soon as they stepped out of the basket, a series of booming sounds suddenly echoed through the air, startling the unsuspecting witches, leaving them momentarily frozen in place. Wendy explained that it was a cannon salute, a welcoming gesture from His Highness. The witches from the border town had come out to greet them. They walked through the green-shaded corridor and entered the grand hall of the castle. There, Sylvie finally saw Tilly's brother, who was seated at grand table. He bore a slight resemblance to the princess. Roland introduced himself briefly, assuring the witches that there's no need to feel constrained and that they could treat the town as their own slumbering isle. Unable to contain her curiosity, Sylvie activated her magical eye and was taken aback. The expected darkness did not materialize. The man before her wasn't wearing the god punishment stone, and there were no traces of magical activity around him. He appeared just as he did in the normal field of vision. It wasn't an illusion, nor was he being controlled. This could only mean that the man before her was indeed Roland himself. Since the arrival of the 5 witches from Slumbering Isle, Roland had been in a constant state of excitement. After the evening banquet concluded, he found himself lying in bed, unable to fall asleep. Frustrated, he got up and poured himself half a glass of baijiu. Nightingale sat beside him, teasingly remarking if he couldn't sleep because he had seen new witches. Roland smiled and inquired about how things were going with the new sisters. She pursed her lips and expressed skepticism towards these new witches. One of them, named Sylvie, spoke was at least lying 50% of the time. While it wasn't to the extent of malicious intent, there were definitely hidden agendas. Roland casually remarked, "Perhaps she wants to confirm if I am truly Roland Wimbledon." Nightingale was slightly shocked and didn't quite understand. Roland explained that he knew Tilly believed he might have been replaced or controlled because, in her eyes, Roland was nothing more than a lazy and inept prince who would never protect witches. Any derogatory comment to describe the 4th prince would be an understatement. In order to avoid punishment, he often shifted all responsibility onto Tilly Wimbledon and even fabricated evidence. Curiously, Nightingale asked, "So, are you really Roland Wimbledon?" Roland looked into Nightingale's eyes and replied, "I am. And also I'm not." Nightingale was taken aback. She knew that Roland wasn't lying. Nightingale didn't mind. Regardless, as long as Roland was the Roland she knew, it didn't matter to her. After breakfast, Wendy led the 5 witches from Slumbering Isle to the office. The witches bowed their heads in greeting. Roland, not particularly concerned about formalities, wanted everyone to relax. He hoped the new witches could familiarize themselves with the town and the environment during the first week. They were free to explore Border Town. Nobody would discriminate against them or take them away. During this time, Roland wanted them to practice their abilities and attend educational classes after dinner alongside other witches from the Border Town. They would receive a monthly salary 1 gold royal, and if they had any questions, they could consult with Scroll and Wendy. The description in Tilly's letter was not very detailed, so Roland wanted to test their abilities first. Before that, Sylvie had something to give to Roland. She opened the package in her hand and placed several yellowed parchment papers and a letter on the table. Roland, with a puzzled expression, opened the envelope. The letter was not long, and he quickly reached the end, but the contents described inside stirred up a storm in his heart. It was an ancient document that Tilly and the others had found in a ruin. Roland and Scroll immediately recognized that the writing on the parchment was identical to the ancient books Hakura had previously obtained from the ruins in the eastern forest. If it was the church that had constructed all of this, why did they abandon it all? Moreover, not only were these grand structures left behind, but even the records from 450 years ago were completely wiped out. What were they trying to hide? The scorching summer sun couldn't bring any warmth to Roland. He could only feel a chilling sensation rising from the depths of his feet, eerie and frigid. What about the ruin lightning found in the hidden forest somehow connected to these ruins? And what about the demonic beasts, devils, and the city of Takara? What kind of catastrophe had occurred 450 years ago? Roland felt a strong sense of unease welling up within him. He decided to inform Tilly about the devils and the holy city of Takara in his response letter and included a picture of a devil as well. After equipping the entire army with the new generation of firearms, Roland will then make preparations to venture into the forest alongside the witches to confront the potential threat of the demons. He understood deeply that peace was not permanent, and it was essential to rapidly strengthen his own power. When the inevitable war arrived, he wanted to have the strength to fight back. The testing location was chosen to be the grassy land outside the town walls. The first to undergo testing was Liane, a petite girl with short, black curls. Her ability allowed her to effortlessly manipulate the terrain within a 5-meter range. During the test, Lian caused the earth beside her to rise vertically, forming a towering pillar that reached a height of 7 to 8 meters. The second participant was Honey, a girl nicknamed Honey due to her sweet personality. She was even shorter than Lian and had just turned 18 the previous winter. Honey possessed the primary ability of beast language, which allowed her to communicate with and influence animals within her range. Various animals under the influence of her magic would carry out her commands. In addition, Honey had an interesting secondary ability, animal messengers. She could use messenger animals to deliver her commands to target animals, recruiting more powerful creatures to her cause. However, this ability was currently unstable. The third participant was Evelyn, a woman in her mid-20s. According to Tilly, her ability could transform low-quality beer into other tasty alcoholic beverages with completely different styles and flavors. Roland's initial purpose for her ability is quite apparent: alcohol purification. However, it wouldn't be gentlemanly to give someone alcohol early in the morning. So on to the next one. The fourth witch is Sylvie. Whenever Roland faces her, he can't help but feel a sense of unease. He simply senses that he has an inexplicable vulnerability in her presence. What's worse is that he knows it's not just a figment of his imagination, it's actually her ability. Sylvie possesses a vision that disregards obstacles. As long as she wishes it, his clothes might as well not exist. Roland can't help but sigh inwardly, wondering why he doesn't possess such an ability. Sylvie's long, straight hair falls to her shoulders in a vibrant shade of green. Her ability is quite easy to understand. She can see everything within her surrounding area, including what is behind her. Her vision can penetrate through obstacles. Moreover, she can also see magical energy. The last witch to make her appearance is Candle. Like Anna, she also celebrated her coming-of-age day during the previous month of demons. She now has the ability to maintain the original properties of objects she touches for a certain period of time. For example, if she uses her power on an ice block, it won't melt even when exposed to sunlight and will continue to emit a chilling aura. However, after several rounds of testing, Roland realizes that her ability is not as perfect as he had imagined. Candle needs direct contact with the target object, which makes it difficult for her to solidify objects with high temperatures. His plan to obtain a drop of steel that would forever remain in a white-hot state, providing a continuous heat source for the blast furnace, has fallen through. Aside from Anna, no one dares to touch something that reaches thousands of degrees with their bare hands. However, even so, this seemingly introverted girl remained Roland's greatest acquisition. In the realm of industrial production, the solidification of material states can truly be deemed priceless. Subjected to factors such as heating, cooling, friction, and external forces, metals experience structures deform. If a crucial component of a machine can maintain a constant state, it signifies that it can consistently operate at maximum efficiency and precision. In other words, the application of intense heat can effectively enhance the mechanical strength of inferior metals. Emerging from the mist, Nightingale inquired, "Do you have a favorite among these 5 witches?" Roland casually replied, "They are all excellent." "What? You like all of them?" Roland playfully tapped Nightingale's head and she stuck out her tongue in response. Then, together, Roland and Nightingale returned to the castle. In the reception hall on the ground floor, the long rectangular table was already filled with various dishes. As the other witches took their seats, everyone began indulging in the feast. It was the first time for the newly arrived witches to experience such a lavish dinner and enjoy such comfortable showers. Evelyn felt a bit down, fearing she might not have a role to play and be left out. Scroll reassured her, mentioning how His Highness had never treated any witch differently in the border town. Hummingbird joined the conversation. Many of them had nothing else to do besides their work, but His Highness had provided them with ample leisure playtime and a lot of freedom. As the dinner approached its end, the prince suddenly clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention. The first item to be served was baijiu, which had a richer flavor than beer or fruit wine and was more intoxicating. Therefore, underage witches were not allowed to partake. 3 glasses were placed in front of Evelyn, crystal clear and transparent. Each contained a different drink. One glass was colorless, resembling pure water, the second had a milky white hue, and the last one shimmered with a bright orange color. Evelyn's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. She picked up the glass containing the orange-colored drink and took a sip. Just as His Highness had described, the taste of baijiu was much stronger than beer, even slightly throat-stinging. Her taste buds detected a hint of bitterness, but the fragrant aroma of apples diluted its impact. It was her first time tasting such an exquisite drink. The baijiu mixed with milk was milder, almost devoid of bitterness. She could sense that besides milk, there was probably a touch of honey or sugar added to it. The sweetness and the aroma of the alcohol blended together, creating an entirely new flavor. Finally, when it was time for the last glass, she took a small sip. A scorching sensation immediately rolled over her tongue and down her throat, just as she had expected. With no other flavors to interfere, only the pure taste of the baijiu remained. It started with a fiery heat and then transitioned into a sweetness hidden beneath the bitterness. Roland smiled, knowing that this glass was not the most intense baijiu. There was still room to enhance its richness. He would let Evelyn taste it later, and she was eagerly anticipating it. Once the wineglasses and plates were cleared, the prince ordered the servants to bring a pile of boxes and place them on the long table. These were small gifts for the adult witches. He hoped that the witches would open the boxes when they returned to their rooms to rest for the night. After dinner, Nightingale carried the box back to her bedroom. Before she had a chance to open it, Lightning, Maisie, Lily, and Rem bounded in, their eyes gleaming as they stared at the box in her hands. These young witches felt that His Highness was biased, not allowing them to drink wine and denying them gifts. When they opened the box, they were greeted by a strange garment that caught everyone's attention. It felt incredibly soft to the touch, made of high-quality silk, but it didn't look like a piece of clothing at all because it was too small. Maisie thought it was a windproof eyewear, while Nightingale unfolded the piece of paper that came with it. It contained instructions and descriptions of the gift. Wendy and Nightingale stood still, momentarily stunned. After reading the letter, the faces of the adult witches turned red. The young witches quickly caught on to the hint, and Wendy, in an unusual display of embarrassment, wore a flushed expression. Only Lightning remained unfazed, her eyes filled with curiosity and envy. She asked Wendy to try it on, sparking Wendy's deep embarrassment. She promptly ushered the 4 of them out before heaving a sigh of relief. Nightingale also felt a tinge of embarrassment. While it was common to receive clothing items from the castle for everyday use, no one had ever felt awkward about it. However, this gift was clearly intended to fit individuals of different sizes. In other words, Roland had carefully observed each person's measurements.
Yeah, boy.
The thought made her blush furiously. Nightingale seemed to have an idea. She dissipated into the mist, passed through the walls, and made her way to Anna's room. The door was quickly opened, revealing Anna in her robe. Once Nightingale entered the room and closed the door behind her, she asked about the gift from His Highness. Surprisingly, Anna was delighted and said she had already put it on and found it very comfortable. She asked Nightingale if she wanted to take a look. Nightingale hurriedly waved her hand, asking and stuttering if it wasn't strange for His Highness to give such a gift. Anna, puzzled, explained that His Highness intended to promote it as a product. The item was soft, lightweight, and comfortable. Nightingale couldn't help but marvel inwardly. She hadn't paid attention to these small details but had instead focused on His Highness's goals. Perhaps that was what set her apart, her purity and directness. With these thoughts in mind, Nightingale returned to her room, studied the gift for a while, and then put it on herself. Wendy still hesitated to put it on, but Nightingale teased her that His Highness probably made these designed specifically for her. She pulled Wendy into the mist to try it on.
Okay.
Sylvie felt that she had witnessed more extraordinary events today than in the past few years. From the pipes that released water with just a flick of a switch, to the soap that exuded a faint fragrance. and the wine that burned like fire when consumed. Everything seemed incredible. Of course, the most unbelievable thing was the garment given after dinner. Such clothing was usually exchanged between lovers, yet according to His Highness, he not only wanted to give these clothing to the witches but also planned to promote it and popularize it in the Western territories. Sylvie couldn't help but shudder. What noble would choose to personally engage in such a business? Or was it that he truly had an unusual interest towards boing-boings and cakes? Sylvie couldn't help but recall Ash's warning, and she involuntarily stepped back a step. Ash was right. His Highness was a dangerous person, and if possible, it would be better for her to keep her distance from him. A week later, Roland spread out the blueprint in his hand. He officially launched the construction project for the steel bridge. He explained to Lien how to raise 2 pieces of land in the middle of the river to serve as the foundation for the bridge piers. Wendy was also on the boat, but over the past week, whenever she saw the prince, she would slightly avert her gaze, appearing somewhat uncomfortable. She stretched her arms and realized that her shoulders no longer hurt, and her arms were no longer sore. She wanted to find an opportunity to thank His Highness. Next, they would dig out some grooves and fill them with cement, repeating the process until a cement wall was formed that penetrated the bottom of the riverbed. Carl thought this idea was incredibly clever. This way, even if the river water washed away the outer layer of soil, it would be blocked by the solid cement wall. Before long, a mass of grayish-green mud emerged to the surface of the water, appearing soft and emitting an awful smell that caused everyone to cover their noses. However, in Roland's eyes, this was excellent fertilizer. Over the centuries, the remains of fish and other aquatic creatures, water plants, and human waste had gradually accumulated in the soil. He hoped to utilize it someday. Sonny looked at the wheat in his hand, which had been nourished with organic fertilizer, and saw that its quantity had doubled, and the grains had grown larger. He had initially become a knight to escape his peasant identity, but within a few months, he had turned from a knight to a prisoner and then inexplicably ended up working in the town hall. Now, he was starting to enjoy this job more and more. The first batch of wheat planted in the border town has finally reached the day of harvest. The serfs, under the scorching sun, use sickles to cut the wheat stalks, bundling them up and transporting them to the other side of the river. In the afternoon, Barav excitedly rushed into the office. According to the preliminary statistics from the municipal hall, the yield per acre of each assigned field is at least 4 times higher than before, with the highest currently reaching 6 times. Barav's expression appears even more ecstatic than Roland's. With just an additional 2,000 farmers, the town will be able to meet the food consumption needs of 50 to 60,000 people. It's simply unbelievable. In this era, the main reason for the inability to increase urban population is the low agricultural productivity. Even a large city like the capital, with a population of over 20,000, requires dozens of surrounding villages to provide food for its residents. Roland hopes to enter mechanized farming early, where the output of a single person will be enough to feed tens of thousands of people in the future. The significant achievement of a bountiful harvest in the border town today, without the promotion and application of agricultural technology and machinery, was only able to achieve mainly attributed to Leaf's amazing work. In the evening, Roland gave a speech from a high platform, and it felt like time had returned to that dusk 4 months ago. The roaring bonfire, the densely packed crowd, and the last remnants of sunlight reflected on their faces were all familiar sights. However, what was different this time was the expressions on their faces. Instead of the initial fear and unease, now they were filled with the joy of a bountiful harvest and undeniable anticipation. Roland didn't introduce himself or waste time with pleasantries. He went straight to the point. He declared that everyone present could become free citizens. Once they became free citizens, they had the freedom to choose whether to continue farming or seek other occupations. The list of promotions would be announced in a couple of days. This simple statement ignited the atmosphere at the gathering. People couldn't contain their excitement and started shouting and cheering. Furthermore, starting from next year, as long as the harvest meets the promotion standards, even if the yield doesn't rank at the top, individuals can still become free citizens. In other words, as long as they work diligently, they can definitely shed their status as serfs. Roland paused for a moment and looked around. I hope that one day in the future, there will be no more serfs in Border Town. Everyone will become true citizen of the Border Town. The moment Roland's words faded away, the cheers of the people echoed through the sky above the Redwater River, continuing without end. Timothy walked into the arched dome at the top of tower in Bluewater Harbor. Step by step, he approached the desk and sat down in the oversized chair. Leaning forward, he pressed his face against the tabletop and took a gentle sniff, as a faint, pleasant fragrance entered his nostrils. At that moment, he couldn't help but burst into laughter. He had finally won. Garcia had given up Bluewater Harbor, giving up the southern frontier, which also meant giving up the throne of Grey Castle. The knight guarding outside pushed the door open and entered. Timothy would depart for the capital tomorrow morning. Aside from the personal guard and the knights of Grey Castle, he left the rest of the knights and mercenaries under the command of this knight commander. Timothy ordered him to guard the southern frontier well, ensuring that the Sand tribes would not set foot on Grey Castle's territory again. The young knight hesitated, and Timothy knew what he was thinking. He reassured him that as soon as the matter in Bluewater Harbor was resolved, he would immediately recall him to the capital. The young knight mustered the courage to ask Timothy if there was any news about his brother. The knight's words caused Timothy to pause for a moment. Indeed, it had been 2 months since his brother was sent to plunder the western frontier, and there had been no news. Timothy, with his back turned to the young knight, stated that his brother must have returned to the capital ahead of them. He then ordered the young knight to burn everything that belonged to Garcia, including this building. He wanted everyone in the southern frontier to know that Garcia's lair no longer existed. He also wanted those who had used the pills but didn't die on the battlefield to be killed. Staying behind in the border town, safely withstood the month of the demons, defeating Duke Ryan, and capturing the Changgu stronghold, even causing the complete loss of contact with the 1,500 militiamen of Raymond. How did he manage to do all this? Timothy never delved deep into understanding his younger brother. Whether it was Garcia or Jylan, they never enjoyed playing with him when they were young. Undoubtedly, something must have happened to him after he arrived in Border Town, leading to the changes he had undergone. Regardless of what he encountered, the population and location of Border Town is predetermined that he had nowhere else to run. With no harbor or fleet and the impassable wilderness behind him, Roland could only hold that corner, waiting for his army to march and trampling onto his territory.
Are you sure about that?
Through the dimly lit corridor, Maine stood before the sacred shrine. Pope Oberlin, now aware of Heather's message, fell into a lengthy silence, exhaling a deep sigh. He had seen Heather growing up. Oberlin inquired about Garcia and the kingdom of Wolfheart, as well as the new poison. Maine responded, stating that it had proven remarkably effective in conquering Fong-Tooth Fortress. The defending forces held out for a month before perishing, and the Judgment Army swiftly breached the city walls. The residential areas were devoid of life, but when it came to the assault on Wolfheart City, the poison seemed to have lost its effect. Presently, the enemy's resistance remained stubbornly resilient. Oberlin quickly identified 2 mistakes made by Maine. Firstly, he should have launched the attack during the initial peak of the plague, seizing the opportunity to swiftly treat the afflicted residents with medication, thus significantly reducing their animosity and gain more church followers. Attacking a month later might have minimized casualties, but it also provided the enemy with ample time to react and discover a way to counteract the spread of the plague. Secondly, Maine should not have been overly concerned about the losses suffered by the Judgment Army and the God Punishment Army. Maine lowered his head in deep sorrow. Oberlin gently tapped his shoulder with his scepter and then offered him some words of comfort. He informed Maine that Garcia and the king of the Wolfheart Kingdom had gathered in one place, presenting an opportunity for the church. It was a chance to capture them all at once. Oberlin stood up and motioned for Maine to follow him. Guided by the guards, Maine walked alongside the Pope, slowly making their way deeper into the dungeon. The enormous stone of God Punishment emitted a faint glow, illuminating the path beneath their feet. The guards ignited their torches, casting flickering light, revealing several towering iron frames standing alongside the stone pathway. Among the dusty air, a canvas covered in dust came into view. It rose high, clearly concealing a colossal object beneath it. Originally meant to be revealed in the final 2 years, the ultimate weapon now needed to be activated ahead of schedule. Maine could hardly believe his eyes. It was a massive, grotesque four-wheeled iron carriage, with a single wheel taller than his own stature. It lacked a carriage compartment, instead featuring terrifying metal ramming horns and skeletal frames. At the center of the frame, a spiky bone shield was mounted, as large as 3 or 4 door panels combined. 2 straight iron rods, one on each side, protruded from the shield's openings, pointing forward like poised arrows. This weapon could only be activated through the use of magic and required the presence of 3 or 4 witches to operate it properly. The following words from Oberlin nearly caused Maine to stumble and fall to the ground. It originated from the church's enemy, the demons from hell. Oberlin cautioned that this weapon must never be seen by the common folk. To assist him, Oberlin would dispatch 2 pure ones. Oberlin assured Maine that no one could escape from their hands. Pure ones under the Pope's command. Maine's heart trembled. The witches nurtured and raised by the church were known as pure ones, but the witches under the Pope's authority were the selected elite, the strongest among them. Meanwhile, in Border Town, Roland held the first high-level meeting of the Border Town in the castle's reception hall. Everyone was actively reporting on their work. Compared to the initial days when the scene was supported by only Barav and his 10 apprentices, the municipal hall had now expanded into a massive group of nearly 100 people. Among them were impoverished nobles, captured knights and their retinues, as well as native residents who had completed their elementary education. The attendees of the first high-level meeting were all the highest-ranking officials of their respective departments. Sonny applied to construct a mill next to the Crimson Water River, and Roland approved the request, instructing Sonny to first submit an application to the municipal hall. Once the funding was granted, they could work with the Department of Construction to develop a detailed plan. Additionally, Sonny also brought a promotion list of serfs, which included a staggering 516 individuals. Next came the Education Department, where Scroll reported that a total of 85 individuals had completed their elementary education. Following that was the Chemical Engineering Department. Kyle's first statement was that he hoped His Highness could find a true representative as soon as possible. He expressed his dislike for being in a leadership position and attending meetings. Roland rolled his eyes secretly. Since becoming a lord, he had learned to selectively ignore certain remarks. Kyle then began his report, mentioning that the laboratory was short-staffed. Fortunately, 5 individuals had recently joined, all of them young but clever, and they had completed their elementary education. The chief alchemist Kyle, in particular, seemed to have a disrespectful attitude and choice of words. However, considering his age and his enthusiasm for chemical experiments, Roland didn't feel much resentment. After all, when Kyle experienced the explosion accident and was completely healed by Manhwa, his first reaction was to conduct experiments without any constraints. He even planned to taste the flavors of different acidic solutions. Such fervent enthusiasm was truly unrivaled. The fourth person to report was Minister Carl from the Department of Construction. He provided an update on the major projects and construction work in Border Town. The next person was Axe, who was attending such a meeting for the first time and appeared somewhat uncertain. He reported that the Second Army had completed its basic training, while the First Army, except for the artillery unit, had been equipped with the latest firearms. Roland expressed his gratitude to everyone for attending the inaugural meeting. He expressed deep satisfaction with the progress and development of each department as presented in the reports. He also mentioned his intention to increase everyone's wage. Furthermore, he announced his plan to officially establish a city in this location after the end of this year's Month of the Demons. In other words, the small town would be upgraded to a true city. This grand city would stretch from the savage wilderness in the west to the Changji stronghold in the east and from the sea in the south. Its natural defenses would be formed by the surrounding mountains and treacherous terrain. The city's area would far surpass that of the capital and any other city in the 4 major kingdoms. He urged everyone to push forward with their tasks and work diligently, in order to welcome the establishment of the new city with even greater enthusiasm. He looked at each person in the meeting and said, word by word, I hope that this city will remain warm as spring, even amidst the boundless winter. After the meeting, Roland asked Barav to stay behind for a private discussion. Barav expressed his concerns about the recent increase in expenses and the significant decrease in the treasury reserves of the city hall. There were only 2,000 gold left, which posed a serious risk. Roland took a sip of tea before responding, stating that next month when the Margaret merchant group arrived in the town, they could generate some income through trade. Additionally, once the sale of the hot air balloons was finalized, a substantial amount of income could be expected. Regarding the Department of Chemical Engineering, Barav expressed his dissatisfaction with Kyle's attitude toward Roland. However, Roland reassured him that it didn't bother him. He didn't need scientists to put on a show in front of him, he only expected them to shine and demonstrate their passion in their respective fields. After finishing his experiments for the day, Kyle returned home and took out a book, flipping directly to the last page. It was a neatly divided grid with around 100 squares. Each square in the top left corner had a small number, ranging from 1 to 118. Most of the squares were blank, except for a few in the middle that had symbols filled in. For example, square number 26 had the symbol for iron, and square number 29 had the symbol for copper. Kyle scratched his head, and wondered how could the prince forget such important information. The Highness reassured him that these symbols followed a specific pattern and believed that Kyle could fill in the remaining squares on his own. Prince Roland mentioned that this principle can be found in intermediate chemistry. In order to uncover the truth of the world, Kyle must obtain this sacred text as soon as possible. He suddenly realized that he could bring in the apprentices from the workshop from another city, thus filling all 3 laboratories and having more people assist him in researching methods for large-scale acid production. The following day, as they ventured deeper into the mine, the cave became increasingly damp. Sylvie carefully avoided the water droplets dripping from above as she carried a torch and proceeded through the cave. Even without light, true sight was not hindered by darkness, they only used torches to conserve magical energy. Nightingale, who was leading the way, suddenly stopped at a fork in the path. Lightning took out her notebook and checked their directions. Sylvie used her ability to quickly determine which path led to the mining area and which was a dead end. Once the task was completed, Nightingale circled back to the front of the group, leading them back the way they came. Sylvie noticed that Nightingale's ability seemed to be more than just invisibility. She could faintly sense the magic fluctuations caused by Nightingale's transformations but couldn't capture her form or movements. According to Lightning's description, Nightingale was the most powerful combat-oriented witch in the Witch Union. Perhaps that's why Prince Roland insisted on Nightingale joining the expedition. There are rumors that this mine used to be the lair of an ancient monster. Sylvie wasn't convinced, no creature could escape the detection of her magic eye. The exploration team consisted of 4 members, Sylvie, Nightingale, Lightning, and a young girl named Lucia. Whenever Sylvie discovered an ore, Lucia would transform it into various fragments and carefully store them in her pockets to be identified by the prince. Lightning was responsible for mapping the cave's terrain, and according to her proud remarks, no expedition would be complete without her. Her tone reminded Sylvie of the captain who temporarily stayed on Slumbering Isle. They soon arrived at cave number 23 and encountered 3 more forks in the path. Sylvie hesitated as she noticed there were 5 possible routes, with one seeming to loop back from below. Upon closer inspection, she realized that the narrow passage descended for a short while before turning sharply and heading directly toward the mining area. The group quickly reached the bottom, and Sylvie swiftly scanned the straight forks. The paths were filled with mud and stones, but when her gaze fell on the middle one, just as Sylvie was about to continue exploring along that path, she was hit by a strong wave of dizziness that interrupted her connection with her magic eye. Nightingale prepared to enter and investigate alone. Sylvie closed her eyes and reopened them, only to find herself still surrounded by pitch darkness. It was as if her vision had been stripped away. She suppressed the growing headache and tried to expand her field of view, but there was nothing to be seen. As Nightingale prepared to descend and investigate, Sylvie held her hand and stopped her. She knew there was only one thing that could cause such an effect. Nightingale looked puzzled and asked what it was. The stone of God punishment. Sylvie gritted her teeth and replied, there is stone of God punishment underground, and it's capable of covering the entire area. Upon learning this information, Roland immediately mobilized the soldiers of the First Army to enter the North Slope mine. The final investigation confirmed Sylvie's speculation. The deep cave at the bottom of the mine contained a massive amount of the stone of God punishment. Once it was determined that there was no danger, Roland, accompanied by Carter, Anna, Nightingale and Lightning, entered cave number 23. He wanted to witness firsthand of the stone of God punishment. The entire cave was illuminated by the light emanating from these crystal-like stones. They rose from the ground, each with a height ranging from 20 to 30 meters, resembling towering neon towers that stood proudly before Roland's eyes. The staircase was not carved out by the soldiers, as Carter explained. He speculated that the staircase had existed for decades, while Anna said it's likely to be here for more than hundreds of years. Roland, accompanied by the knights and witches, walked straight to the edge of the stone of God punishment. It was only when standing at the base of the stone pillar that one could truly grasp the enormity of the stones. Roland also noticed that although the stone had the common crystal and prism shape, its surface lacked any crystal and patterns. Instead, it was smooth like a flat glass panel. Lightning was curious about the stone of God punishment, while Nightingale was repulsed by it. How she wished that such stones didn't exist in the world. Lightning asked Roland if she could take some as a trophy. Roland nodded, and Lightning swung the stone in her hand, forcefully striking one corner of the prism. However, it remained intact and undamaged. She then took out a dagger, but it couldn't even produce a single fragment. Nightingale tested it with her pistol, causing a few sparks to fly upon hitting the stone. After the smoke cleared, the group approached, only to see that the bullet had left a shallow mark on the surface of the stone of God punishment. It was perplexing, as normally applying force would reduce it to powder. Anna, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke up, "Your Highness, do you remember the treasure map drawn by Ferlin?" Roland pondered for a moment. Anna explained it did not point to the North Slope mine, but rather to this place, this underground cave harboring a vast amount of the stone of God punishment. After returning to his office, Roland called for scroll and reproduced Ferlin's drawing on the Book of Enchantments. The pattern in the book was similar to what he remembered, and the southernmost point did indeed fall at the foot of the North Slope mountain. If Anna's speculation was correct, could this be a map left by the church in their search for new veins of the stone of God punishment? But why did they abandon everything after going through the effort of carving a direct path to the bottom of the cave with the stone staircase? If the church had established a border chapel 450 years ago, the border town would be completely different today. Judging by the value and uses of the stone of God punishment, this mine doesn't seem like a resource that can be easily abandoned. Now that the Takira Holy City was an inaccessible forbidden zone, perhaps these answers could only be found by going to the stone tower, or maybe they would never be known. As night fell, Professor Scroll would hold lectures in the hall, unlike the noble academies in the big cities. The students who came to listen were all witches of the Witch Union. When it came to the recent tasks assigned by Prince Roland, Evelyn's eyes dimmed. The prince had yet to give her any real tasks, he would only occasionally ask her to taste his newly concocted baijiu. Evelyn rested her chin on the table, feeling disheartened. And, His Highness's baijiu is becoming more and more undrinkable. She once suggested adding water or fruit juice to balance it out, but His Highness seems to only want to make the strongest alcohol. Candle couldn't find the right words to say either, and in this regard, she could sympathize with Evelyn. As she recalls, after arriving at Slumberal, most of their time was spent on mundane tasks. With the increasing abundance of fish oil resources, solidified candles became less essential, and drinking alcohol was strictly forbidden by Lady Tilly's orders. Candle recalled the tense early days on Slumber Isle when supplies were allocated based on abilities, which created a subtle sense of division and exclusion among the witches. Fortunately, Lady Tilly took good care of them. However, in the border town, such situations never occurred. The witches all sat at the same table, enjoying meals together with Prince Roland, wearing and using the same things. Most importantly, regardless of their individual powers, they were treated equally. This was evident in their daily interactions. Although Candle had only been in the border town for a short 2 weeks, she had already deeply felt this sense of unity. As the witches settled down one by one, Scroll arrived. Today, there would be no lessons. Instead, a comprehensive test would be conducted to assess their knowledge. It had been 3 months since the witches began their studies, and His Highness deemed it necessary to evaluate their progress. All the questions were written on these sheets of paper, a total of 60. Total of 120 points. She paused for a moment, then added, "By the way, His Highness mentioned that only those who answer more than half of the questions correctly will be able to enjoy the ice cream dessert on Saturday afternoon. Those who score below this threshold will have their afternoon tea privileges revoked." Candle heard a soft click behind her. She turned around to find Nightingale with a bewildered expression, holding a broken charcoal pencil that had fallen to the ground, split into 2 pieces. His Highness made a special announcement that the newly arrived witches from Slumbering Isle had the option to either participate in the test or take a day off. Regardless of their scores, they would be able to enjoy afternoon tea. Candle and Evelyn decided to stay and participate. Honey and Leanne, on the other hand, happily stood up, bowed to Scroll, and left the hall. Sylvie, feeling unwell, also bowed and left after them. The compiled summary sheet was handed to Roland by the Scroll. Lately, he had been puzzled by the new discoveries in the Northern Slope mining area, making it difficult for him to concentrate on his daily work. He decided to shift his focus to something more relaxing for the time being. "Oh, Nightingale actually passed the test?" Roland exclaimed in surprise. Scroll smiled and replied, "Nightingale's score is among the top, and she even got a perfect score in the language section." Roland clicked his tongue and said, "I thought this test would make her cut down on sweets." Before he could finish his sentence, he felt a sharp pinch on his shoulder. This time, all the members of the Witch Union scored above 60, which made him very pleased. Roland noticed that 2 witches from Slumbering Isle also participated in the test. Evelyn scored 5 points, while Candle scored 36. Candle must have had some foundation, and most of her points came from the language section. The individual qualities of the witches are truly astonishing, living up to the continuous enhancement brought by magic, both internally and externally. Witches from the border town are equally remarkable. Within just 3 months, individuals like Lily, Hummingbird, and Rem have gone from being illiterate to mastering the basics of reading and writing. This alone surpasses the abilities of most ordinary people. If everyone could completely set aside their biases and work together with the witches, pushing for social and cultural development, what kind of future would await them? Roland's heart was filled with curiosity.